The island stretched before us, shrouded in the kind of quiet that makes you question whether the world is holding its breath. The golden light of dawn spilled across the sand, painting it in shades that could rival any treasure we had ever imagined. But it wasn't the glimmer of coins or the sparkle of jewels that caught my attention. It was the way the air seemed heavy with stories. You could feel it in your chest, a subtle weight, as though every grain of sand had soaked up centuries of secrets. The sea lapped gently at the shore, steady and unhurried, as if it knew the truth about what was buried here and wasn't in any rush to give it away. We came in search of gold, that much was true, but the island had a presence, almost as if it were alive, watching us, curious about what we might uncover, not just from beneath its soil, but within ourselves. The trees leaned toward us with their tangled branches, their leaves rustling softly, like whispers meant only for the wind. Somewhere in the distance, a bird cried out, its voice sharp and fleeting, vanishing into the thick green of the forest. It was in moments like that you realized treasure wasn't always metal locked in chests. Sometimes it was knowledge, the kind you couldn't carry in your hands, but that changed you all the same. We set foot on the sand, each step a little heavier than the last, not from exhaustion, but from the growing awareness that this place demanded respect. It wasn't the kind of island you rushed through, tearing at the ground in search of what you thought you wanted. No, this was the kind of place where you paused, where you let the wind press against your face and the salt cling to your skin, because it had something to teach you if you were willing to listen. I noticed the rocks along the shoreline were smooth and dark, their edges worn down by time and tide. They reminded me of the people who once lived here, how life had shaped them, softened some parts, sharpened others. We moved inland, past the first line of palm trees, and the air shifted. It grew warmer, thicker, and filled with the scent of earth and moss. The ground was uneven, roots winding up like veins, reminding us that the island itself had a pulse. In that moment, I began to wonder who had walked here before us. What were their dreams? What were their fears? Did they find the treasure, or did the treasure find them? And if they left anything behind, was it gold? Or was it a story, waiting for someone brave enough to hear it? There were markings on some of the trees, faint but deliberate. We traced our fingers over them, feeling the grooves carved by hands long gone. They weren't just directions, they were warnings, the kind that didn't shout, but rather murmured, urging caution. It was as if the island was testing us, measuring our patience. The deeper we went, the more I realized that gold was only the surface. What truly mattered was understanding why the treasure was here at all, and what it had cost to keep it hidden. Every sound seemed amplified, the crunch of leaves beneath our boots, the creak of wood, the distant rush of waves that could no longer be seen. The forest seemed to close around us, not to trap us, but to draw us in, to pull us towards something we couldn't yet see. That's when I noticed the silence between the calls of birds and the rustle of branches. It was too complete to be accidental. Something was waiting, something beyond the obvious, beyond the greed that had driven so many to these shores. The realization struck me quietly but firmly. The true treasure wasn't going to be the coins or the jewels. It was the knowledge that the island was guarding something more powerful than wealth. It was guarding its story. And stories outlast gold. They survive storms, they survive theft, and they survive the slow crumble of time. Perhaps the island knew that the gold was just a lure, a test to see who would come, and what they would be willing to see beyond their own desires. We stood there for a long while, letting the wind circle us, letting the air carry whatever lesson it wanted to leave behind. And in that stillness, it felt as though the island had decided to trust us, at least for a moment. Not enough to reveal everything, but enough to give us the sense that what lay ahead would be far greater than anything we had imagined when we first set sail. Sometimes the greatest treasures are the ones you cannot carry away, the ones that change you so completely you never leave the same person who arrived. The sea was never silent here. Even in the calmest moments, when the surface looked like polished glass, you could hear the faint hum beneath it, a rhythm older than memory itself. The waves didn't just roll in to touch the shore. They arrived with purpose, carrying with them the weight of everything they had seen. Every crest seemed to speak, and every retreat seemed to sigh, as though the ocean was telling a story to the island, one it had been repeating for centuries. You could almost imagine the words hidden in the foam, tumbling over each other before dissolving back into the deep. And the wind, it wasn't just air moving from one place to another. It was a messenger. It came from far beyond the horizon, from places we would never set foot on, places where storms raged and ships were swallowed whole. The wind carried the scent of salt and distance, the faint traces of fires long extinguished, and the memories of voices calling out in the night. Sometimes it was gentle, brushing past us as though in greeting. Other times it pressed hard against our backs, urging us forward, as if it knew the path better than we did. There were moments when it wrapped around my ears just right, and I could swear it was speaking in a language I almost understood. Standing there, with the sound of the waves at my feet and the wind pressing against my shoulders, I began to wonder if the treasure we sought had ever truly belonged to anyone. Perhaps it had been taken and lost, stolen and hidden, not once but many times, its story growing more tangled with every change of hands. The sea knew, the wind knew. They had been there through every chapter. When the first chest was lowered into the sand under a moonless sky, when desperate men had fought on the shoreline, when storms had scattered ships like leaves in a river. These forces weren't just witnesses. They were keepers of the tale, guardians who spoke only to those patient enough to listen. The island itself seemed to lean into their whispers. The trees swayed, not only from the breeze, but as if they were nodding in agreement with the ocean's tale. Palm fronds clattered softly, their movements timed with the breaking of waves, like punctuation in an unending story. I found myself closing my eyes, letting the sound wash over me, trying to follow its thread. There were parts of it that felt clear, a note of warning here, a swell of triumph there. But just when I thought I had grasped the meaning, it would slip away like water through my fingers. Perhaps that was the point. The true journey of the treasure wasn't meant to be told all at once. It was meant to be felt in fragments, pieced together over time through patience and respect. It wasn't a story written on paper, but one etched in tides and carried in gusts of air. The sea spoke of hands reaching into the depths, of eyes widening in wonder or narrowing in greed. The wind told of sails straining under the weight of storms, of laughter shared over newly found riches, of silence that followed when the cost became too high. We walked along the shoreline, each step a small negotiation between land and water. The wind curled around us, slipping into our clothes, lifting the edges of maps we could barely hold still. The waves seemed to follow, never too close, never too far, as though they were watching to see whether we deserved to hear more. It occurred to me then that the treasure's journey wasn't a straight line from one pair of hands to another. It was a circle, always returning to the sea. No matter how far men carried it, no matter how fiercely they tried to claim it, the ocean always called it back. The thought left me both humbled and unsettled. If every wave and every gust was part of the same chorus, then maybe we weren't the ones in control at all. Maybe we were just another verse in the song, destined to play our part and then fade into the larger melody. I looked out at the horizon, where the water met the sky in a thin, trembling line, and I felt the pull not toward the gold itself, but toward the truth it carried. Some stories are too vast to be told in words, too deep to be written in ink. They belong to the elements, and if you listen long enough, they will tell you not just where the treasure has been, but why it matters at all they were there one day and the next they were not. No hurried footsteps, no splashing oars, no trail through the sand, just absence, quiet and complete. It was as though the island had swallowed them whole, tucking them away in some hidden fold where no eyes could follow. At first we thought it was a trick, some scheme they had woven to catch us off guard. But the longer we looked, the more the silence seemed genuine, as if the world itself had agreed to keep their whereabouts a secret. Yet they were not entirely gone. Every so often, carried on the wind or rising faintly from the dense green of the forest, we would hear it, a voice, or perhaps two, joining together in a tune that didn't quite belong to this place. The notes would come in low, winding around one another like strands of rope, and just when you leaned in to listen harder, they would vanish into the air. It was haunting in its way, the sound too light for danger, but too strange to ignore. The songs were rough, the kind you'd expect from throats used to shouting orders over crashing waves. Still, there was something almost tender in them, like a memory they refused to let go. We would stop in our work when we heard it, each of us turning our heads toward the sound, trying to fix a direction. The forest played tricks with it, bending the melody through branches and echoing it from the rocks until it was impossible to know if it came from the hills or the shore. There were moments I thought the songs were closer than they should have been, drifting just beyond the edge of the clearing where we stood. Other times it felt as though they were far away, fading into the horizon, sung from a place no longer within reach. The strangest thing was how the songs changed. At first, they were sharp and brisk, carrying a kind of defiance that made you believe the pirates were alive and thriving, wherever they had gone. But as the days passed, the notes grew slower, stretched thin, as though something heavy had settled over them. There were pauses now, long ones, where only the wind filled the gap. It made you wonder if they were still together, or if the voices we heard were only fragments, echoes from different places and different times. It was in those moments, listening to that ghostly music, that the island felt most alive. The sound wove itself into the rhythm of the waves and the creak of the palm trees, becoming part of the very fabric of the place. It reminded us that the pirates had been more than just thieves. They had been men with their own stories, stories that didn't end the moment they slipped from sight. The songs were proof of that, a thread of their lives still tugging at the edge of ours. Some nights, as the moon pulled itself over the water and the shadows grew long, I wondered if they even wanted to be found. There was a freedom in disappearing, in stepping away from the chase and letting the world wonder. Perhaps their songs were a way of saying they were still out there, not lost but choosing to remain unseen. Or perhaps they were calling to the sea itself, a lover they could not quite return to, but could never forget. The others spoke of them less and less as time went on. Without a clear trail to follow, without proof of their fate, the mystery began to fade into the background. But the songs never truly stopped. Even when we tried to ignore them, they would find us. In the early hours before sunrise, in the lull of the afternoon heat, in the moments when our minds drifted and our hands stilled. It was as if the pirates wanted to remind us, in their own way, that not all stories reach a neat ending. Perhaps that is the nature of some people, to leave behind not their bodies, not their belongings, but their present, slight enough to travel on air, strong enough to linger in memory. And so, while the island gave us many things, it also kept something for itself. The truth of where the three had gone, hidden away in silence, leaving us only their songs. We could have left without looking back. The ship was ready, the treasure secure, the sails eager to catch the wind. The island had given us all it could, and we had little reason to stay a moment longer. Yet there was something unfinished in the air, something that tugged at us even as we prepared to leave. They were still out there, the ones we had not seen in days, silent but not forgotten. We could have sailed away and let the sea erase their presence, but that would have been the easy choice. It began with a simple thought: what would they have if we left them nothing? The island could feed a man if he knew how to take from it, but it could also starve him if the wrong season came. So we gathered what we could spare: boxes of food, bread wrapped against the damp air, salted meat that would last in the heat, barrels of fresh water. It was not much compared to the treasure we carried, but it felt heavier in meaning than all the gold in our hold. Carrying it to the shore, we did not speak. The waves rolled in and out beside us, indifferent, as though they knew such exchanges were older than any of us. The sea had seen men trade pearls for bread, gold for a handful of fresh fruit. It had watched enemies offer food across battle lines, knowing that hunger stripped away the shape of any quarrel. Now it watched us, silent witnesses to a gesture that asked for nothing in return. We left the boxes where the sand was firm, close enough for the tide to carry their scent inland, but far enough to keep the water from taking them. The sun was low, painting the surface of the sea in a soft burnished glow. I found myself hoping the light would guide them here, the way a lantern guides a sailor home. The wind stirred faintly, brushing over the crates, almost as if sealing the moment in its memory. Somewhere beyond the trees, there might have been eyes watching us. I could not tell. No sound came from the forest, no sign of movement, but the air felt heavier, charged in a way that made the skin prickle. I thought of their songs, the strange melodies that had drifted to us on the wind in the days before, and wondered if we would ever hear them again. Perhaps this food would be enough to keep the music alive a little longer. As we turned back toward the ship, the sea seemed to shift. The waves lapped more insistently, their rhythm quicker, like a heartbeat that had been roused. I do not believe in omens, yet there was something in that change, a sense that the ocean understood what had just passed between us and those unseen men. Food was more than sustenance here. It was a bridge, a quiet agreement that, for all that had been taken and all that had been fought over, there was still room for a human act that needed no repayment. When the sails were hoisted and the anchor lifted, I stood at the stern and looked back one last time. The crates were small from that distance, almost swallowed by the curve of the shore. I could not tell if anyone had come to claim them, but somehow I felt certain they would not remain untouched for long. The sea reached toward them with every wave, as though keeping watch, as though ready to carry the spirit of the gesture out into the world. It struck me then that the treasure we carried was only one kind of wealth, and perhaps not even the most enduring. Gold would be spent, scattered, lost again to the depths, but food given in peace, that left a different mark. It might feed a man's body, but it could also quiet the storms within him. In a place where trust was scarce and survival was never certain, even a small act like this could travel far, carried on the salt air, remembered longer than any coin. Sometimes the sea keeps its distance from people. Other times it accepts the smallest of offerings and returns something invisible yet lasting. And on that day, I think the tide itself carried away our gift, not just to them, but to the vast memory of the ocean, where kindness is never lost. The treasure sat in the hold, packed tight in wooden chests, each one heavy enough to strain the hands of two men. We had worked for it, fought for it, bled for it. And yet, as the ship rocked gently in the harbor, a strange feeling began to settle over me. It wasn't the excitement I had expected, nor the satisfaction of a prize finally won. It was something quieter, heavier, like standing in a room too full of shadows. The gold was ours, yes, but so was the burden that came with it. I had seen it before in the eyes of men who had carried more than they needed. Their gaze would shift, always scanning the horizon, always looking over their shoulder, as if the weight of their gain made the air thinner around them. Treasure changes a man, not only in what he owns, but in what he fears. It binds him, holds him tighter than chains, because once it's yours, the thought of losing it becomes a shadow that never leaves. The island had taught me something I hadn't been ready to hear. Not every victory is worth holding on to. There are moments when the truest freedom comes not from clutching what you've taken, but from letting it slip from your grasp. We spend so much of our lives chasing after things we think will set us free. Gold, land, power, only to find that they trap us in a different way. And sometimes walking away feels like surrender, but in truth, it's the only way to keep yourself whole. I thought about the ones we had left behind, about the songs that drifted from the forest, about the food we had placed on the sand. There was no gold in those boxes, no jewels, no proof of conquest, only the choice to leave something behind that didn't shackle the soul. I imagined their hands lifting the lids, their faces lit not by greed, but by the relief of having enough for another day. That was worth more than any coin. The sea seemed to agree. As we sailed out, the wind filled the sails with a sudden strength, almost as if it approved of the decision. The water shimmered in the sunlight, not with the cold glint of treasure, but with the warm, shifting light of movement, forward, away from the island, away from the weight we could not carry forever. There was a lightness in the air that had not been there before, a sense that the journey ahead might matter more than the cargo below. I began to see the gold for what it really was, a test, not a reward. It had drawn us here, yes, but it had also demanded something in return, our time, our energy, our peace of mind. Taking it all and holding on would mean answering to it every day, protecting it against thieves, guarding it even from those we called friends. But leaving some behind, letting part of it stay where it had rested for so long, was like breaking a chain. That is the strange truth about possession. It changes the possessor as much as the possessed. You can begin to mistake what you carry for who you are, and when that happens, you forget that you were someone before you had it, and you can be someone again without it. The hardest part is recognizing when the thing you wanted most has begun to own you instead. The island disappeared behind us, its green hills shrinking against the line of the horizon. I did not feel regret. If anything, I felt as though I had left a part of myself there, but not in the way a man loses something. More like planting a seed, trusting it to grow where it belongs, even if I would never see it again. There is a kind of release in that, a loosening of the knots that tighten in the heart when we hold too tightly to what was never meant to be kept forever. In the end, freedom isn't always about what you win or what you hold in your hands. Sometimes it's about knowing when to let go, stepping away with the wind at your back, and trusting that what lies ahead is worth more than anything you could lock inside a chest. The gold was real enough, heavy in the hands, cold to the touch, and bright enough to catch the light even in the dim belly of the ship. It clinked when we moved it, a sound that had drawn men across oceans and into danger for centuries. But as the days passed and the distance between us and the island grew, I found myself looking at it less and less. The thrill of having it was fading, replaced by something else, something harder to name but far more lasting. When I thought of the island now, it wasn't the treasure that came to mind first. It was the moment the wind carried those strange songs from deep within the trees. It was the sight of the food we left on the sand, the way the waves reached for it like they knew its worth. It was the quiet realization that taking everything we could have taken would have cost more than we were willing to pay. The gold sat still in its chests, but the lessons we carried moved through us every day, shaping the way we looked at the world. We had learned that silence can speak louder than threats, that the absence of a man can haunt a place more than his presence ever did. We had learned that sometimes you meet people not face to face, but through the smallest of exchanges, like leaving food for those you may never speak to, trusting that kindness can travel without an escort. And perhaps most of all, we had learned that victory is not always about possession, but about knowing when to walk away with your soul lighter than when you arrived. There is a kind of wealth that doesn't shine in the sunlight, that can't be counted or stored in a chest. It grows in the mind and settles in the heart, and the more you give it away, the more you seem to have. We left the island richer in a way no storm could take from us. The sea could sink our ship tomorrow and scatter the gold into its depths, but what we learned there would still be ours. It would guide us in the choices we made, in the way we spoke to strangers, in the way we understood the cost of greed and the value of mercy. I thought often of the three we never saw again, not with anger, not even with suspicion, but with a quiet sort of respect. They had their reasons, and the island had a way of keeping secrets that were not ours to uncover. Whatever their fate, they had been part of the story that shaped us, part of the reason we left knowing more than when we arrived. Perhaps they, too, carried lessons away, though I would never know what they were. The sea has a way of stripping you down to what truly matters. It doesn't care about the shine of your coins or the weight of your cargo. It cares only if you have learned how to survive its moods, how to move with its rhythm, how to respect the forces that cannot be controlled. The island had been the same, offering what it wished to offer, taking what it wished to take, and leaving us with only what we were ready to understand. When I think about what we brought home, I realize the gold will likely pass from hand to hand until it belongs to no one. It will be melted, reshaped, perhaps even lost again. But the lessons will stay with us. They will travel further than the gold ever could, passed along in the way we speak, in the choices we make when no one is watching, in the moments when we decide between taking more and leaving enough. And maybe that is the truth the sea had been whispering all along, in its waves and its winds. The greatest treasure is not the gold itself, but the wisdom that comes from the journey, the kind that cannot be stolen, cannot be bought, and cannot be buried. We came seeking gold, but left with stories the sea will keep long after the chests are empty. The island taught us that silence can speak, kindness can bridge oceans, and letting go can set you free. And so we sail on, carrying home not just a treasure, but the lessons worth more than its weight in gold.